Now, back to Sunrise on News Radio 880 KCMX.
Shout, 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 I'm talking to you, so come on. Shout!
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sunrise Show, 18 minutes after the hour, News Radio 880 KCMX, and want to welcome onto the program a Canadian, Dr. Martin Hollenberg. He's a scientist. He's got his PhD in anatomy, and he has been an educator all his life. He was a dean of medicine at the University of British Columbia, and then also a professor, educator. But he retired in 2001, and he just had a fascination with the tall ships, and he wrote a book, and it's been out for a while, The Marco Polo, The Story of the Fastest Clipper, and want to welcome onto the program Dr. Martin Hollenberg. Martin, how are you this morning?
Well, just fine. It's good to be here.
Well, good. You know, it's interesting, these tall ships, and I'm talking about the size of these ships, and you, in your book, talk about how they were made, how they were launched, and it was so crude. I mean, you know, I say that, but I mean, 1851 takes us back to when they had to start building this ship, and they built it all through the winter, and this was up in St. John's, New Brunswick. But this was the tip of the spear back then for getting product, cargo, people across the seas, wasn't it?
That's right, and the ships that I'm talking about in the book were ships that went by sail only. I mean, they'd be great today to save energy.
Oh, exactly right. And I'm looking at this, these masts, at some point 11 stories tall. At some of them had over 40 sails. And I'm looking at the speed, 21 knots. And this was something about the Marco Polo, is that an average voyage was 110 days. But yet the Marco Polo broke that record into 75 days, right?
That's right. And what happened was it was built in St. John, New Brunswick. And it was built to be a lumber carrier. And then it was sent on its way over to Liverpool, where it was refashioned into a passenger liner, which could accommodate about 1,000 people.
That's just amazing when you think about 1,000 people could be carried on these ships. I mean, the first voyage, and you know, Martin, a sailing ship, anyone that's ever sailed knows that you have to tack back and forth. And so these huge ships are going to lean, you know, to when they are making the turn, but then when the wind grabs that and pulls all those sails and just leans that ship over, and then it can really get cutting. But interesting, as you look through your research, one of the fastest days was like a 342 nautical miles in a 24-hour period of time.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, all by sail. And then you think of how the size, I mean, where did the tonnage on the Marco Polo, 1,625 tons,
yeah.
And it's all made by wood, all beams.
Yeah, by softwoods. That distinguished them from the ships being made in Britain at the time, which were hardwood.
Unbelievable.
And on its first voyage, it really moved, and it established a world record. No ship, sail or steam, had gone around the world faster than the Marco Polo. And this was a Canadian ship, Canadian-built ship. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, from an average, of 110 days to now 75 days. Now, all of a sudden, I mean, before Wall Street, I mean, this was such a big deal because of cargo, because of personnel, people traveling, and mail, and all the different shipping industries, because of all the money that could be made turning this around. This was like, all of a sudden, going from wagon train to gasoline-powered vehicle, pretty much. So Well, Martin, it's fascinating from the standpoint that you had to do some traveling as well, right?
That's right. I went down to the Maritimes. I live in Vancouver, so it was a nice trip for us, and my wife came along, and we stopped off at some of the places that the Marco Polo had visited.
Yeah, the port there at St. John's, Brunswick, and then, of course, down to the Maritime Museum. That's in Virginia, am I correct?
Oh, there's several of them.
Yeah.
There's one in Halifax that I visited.
You know, it's interesting.
And some of them have artifacts from the Marco Polo.
Yeah, when we come back, we've got a break coming up, but when we come back, I want to talk about, because traveling, and you, all of a sudden, it talks about how the captain on the ship was the supreme power, and they had unruly crews and drinking and those kind of things. They had the women's quarters, and I know that the Marco Polo was built for lumber in the beginning. They had larger holds, and you think about that, and originally, 100 crew members, 700 passengers, and then on that maiden voyage, before they really put cargo in there, 1,000 passengers on this sailing ship. There's issues about medicine. We want to talk about that when we come back. And you start thinking about the humanity piece. Okay, they're on for, 75 days. How do you clean your clothing? What do you eat? What's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? And who serves that up? And where are the bathroom facilities on this ship? All of those kind of things are going to be covered. We've got Dr. Martin Hollenberg on the radio with us right now. He wrote the book Marco Polo, the story of the fastest clipper, and the one of its ancestors lives right in Medford, believe it or not. One of the future owners of the Marco Polo, James Baines, and his ship line, the James Baines and Company. We want to talk about that as well. We got to get to a break. Martin, hold on there, and we'll come right back. It's the Sunrise Show.
I'll be here.
Good. News Radio 880 KCMX. The Bloomberg Market Update is next.
So get up. Top of the morning to ya.
Now, back to Sunrise on News Radio 880 KCMX.
Good morning, everybody. 34 minutes after the hour. Welcome back to the Sunrise Show. Craig Froelich is your host, and we're continuing with Dr. Martin Hollenberg. He's the author. Of course, he's retired Dean of Medicine from the University of British Columbia. And he's an author now, though. Marco Polo, the story of the fastest clipper. And, Martin, we were just talking in the first segment about how big of a deal this was for the shipping industry to have this softwood ship built in St. John's, New Brunswick, and ferried across to Liverpool. And one of the things you discussed in the book was that these ships were commonly immediately put up for sale. And the fact that this ship had come in 75 days rather than the regular 110 days was a huge boon for this. And Canadians, of course, very proud and built a lot of ships in their day. And this maiden voyage, though, Martin, this is amazing.
Well, it's a world record.
A world record, and yet at 1,000 people on it, and all kinds of dichotomy. And you think about the size of this ship, 184 feet long, 36 feet in, across the deck, and then 29 feet deep. And they had multiple decks. And you were talking about the beds being 6 by 6, and they slept 6 people, and they had women's quarters and men's quarters. And you're thinking all of a sudden, this is like a miniature city for 75 days.
That's right. It's as if they picked a village up out of Scotland and put it on the ship in the middle of the ocean.
Well, exactly right. And you've got issues with the crew. I mean, the captain is kind of the police chief, if you would. And you talked about the medicine, and the real sad thing, an epidemic on this ship, this maiden voyage. Was there, how many infants died from measles?
50. About 50.
Wow. So can you only imagine the psyche that's going through the I mean, you were talking about the fact that there's a farmyard that's on board. They have galleys. They cook their food. And, they even had a printing press and put out a Marco Polo, what was it called?
The Chronicle.
The Chronicle. Once a week, they would print a newspaper on board.
And that was the means of communication between the captain and everyone on board. And he gave a rundown of how they were doing, how far they went. They went to like 300 miles in a day sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I was looking at...
The captain of the ship on its first 2 voyages was a guy named Bully Forbes.
Yeah.
Now, Bully Forbes was a tough guy, and he made sure that people behaved on the ship. If they didn't, he boxed them across the ears, smartened them up. And that would be the crew, of course, not the passengers. And he was a great mariner. Most people remember him as being a brawler, but in fact, he was one of the top mariners in the Merchant Marine of Britain. And he could keep that ship to a course as outlined by the Great Circle Route, which involves the curvature of the Earth. He kept the ship right to the route, within about 5 miles all the way. And they had to determine their position, which they did at noon every day. And they had to know what the longitude was and what the latitude was. And then they would make the appropriate course corrections. And Forbes was known as a captain who could keep his ship on the prescribed route all the time, right from beginning to end.
Yeah,
And then James Baines, who owned the Black Ball line, that's the name of the shipping line.
Right.
He was a master at sizing up a ship, knowing how fast it could go and how well it could accommodate passengers. And at the peak, the Black Ball line had about 180 ships running back and forth between Britain and Australia.
That's amazing.
It became world famous.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about the cargo and the people moving back and forth. This was big business, but yet there was seasonal issues, so the market and trade came into play. And when the the bad weather, then all of a sudden shipping got to be a problem because they would just lose too much, so they couldn't sail. But it's just fascinating. Of course, James Baines and one of his ancestors, Larry Baines, lives here in town.
That's amazing.
I know it. So it was great how the paths crossed. Well, Martin, this is just fascinating. Your research on these ships. Can you only imagine? Now, here's something else. There is a replica of the Marco Polo up in St. John's, New Brunswick, right?
That's right. It's about 2/3 the size of the real thing.
Interesting. I mean, it's just, fascinating, only from the standpoint of size. Can you only imagine being out on the ocean and seeing one of these tall sailing ships with, 11-story tall masts with over 40 sails gleaming in the sun? It had to have been a sight.
It should have. And there are tall ships today flying back and forth. Not very many of them, but there still are a few.
Wow, it's excellent. Well, Martin, we're out of time, but it's great to have you on. And this is just a fascinating topic of discussion, especially when you talk about, supply and demand nowadays and what went on. You think about a flight, right? Across the ocean or whatever, 10, 14 hours, and you're in a airplane, and then you think, okay, what if you're traveling in a car with someone for a day or 2 days or a week? And these folks went on this for 75 to 100 days.
And the ship was wind-driven.
Wind-driven,
It didn't consume any energy.
It's amazing. Martin, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it, and it's great to talk to you. And ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Martin Hollenberg, the author of the Marco Polo, the story of the fastest clipper. We'll be back.
Thank you.